All right, in this lesson, we'll take a look at the research of Jonathan Haidt, and he's going to argue that liberals and conservatives have different moral worldviews, what he calls moral foundations, and that if we can understand these different moral worldviews, that will help us understand some of the political differences in attitudes and preferences among these two groups, or between these groups. In his early research, Haidt was interested in the role of certain emotions in moral judgment, in particular the emotion of disgust. And so he came up with some behaviors that he classified as harmless actions, actions that didn't have any obvious victim or somebody who was being harmed, but nevertheless he thought might be objectionable to people. People might judge them to be disgusting. And he was interested in to see whether there was any influence of the emotion of disgust in the moral judgment that people would make. Here are some examples. A woman uses an old American flag to clean the bathroom, right? So anybody who's kind of feeling a little tinge of patriotism is going to say maybe this is objectionable, right? And so the question is, will they also then say this is wrong? A brother and sister kiss passionately on the lips. Now this is a surefire way to generate disgust. But again, the question is whether this is then judged to be morally wrong. The family dog has been run over by a car. The family cooks and eats it. Now, for many a dog owner, this is horrible. And the question here is whether it is wrong, morally wrong. Right? So Haidt gave these questions to groups in America and Brazil, both to high and low SES populations. SES is socioeconomic status. So we have wealthier Brazilians and Americans and poor Brazilians and Americans. And here are the results. That Haidt found that people had difficulty explaining their moral judgments. So while people might say these were disgusting and disturbing, and they wanted to say these things were wrong, when pressed on the matter, they had difficulty articulating some kind of principle or the reason why these behaviors are morally wrong. They just wanted to say, well, they're just wrong. Now, it was interesting to Haidt because he was interested in the role of emotions. Perhaps the emotions is what's driving the moral judgment, and then they were having difficulty giving a justification for it. And sure enough, he did find that the emotional response, the strength of the emotional response, did correlate to how wrong subjects thought these behaviors were. So people who thought they were very, very disgusting or disturbing were more likely to make a moral judgment about them and say that they were wrong. Now, interestingly, there were class differences and cultural differences. So for the class differences, in general, the low SES subjects were more condemning than the high SES subjects. And in terms of cultural variability, the high SES Brazilians were more condemning than the high SES Americans. So the least condemning group were the college students in the Philadelphia area, the high SES Americans. They might think that these are, or they might feel that these are disturbing, but they were more likely to say that, yeah, they're disturbing, but they're not really wrong. Whereas pretty much in all the other three groups in the study, people felt that they were disturbing and also wanted to judge them morally wrong. Now, from this research, where Haidt notices social class and cultural variability, he started to wonder, well, what is it that counts as moral? What is morality all about? And so he began to investigate the data from anthropology. Researchers have been studying cultures all over the world for decades, for generations. And so the question was, well, what do people all over the world mean by morality? What constitutes morality? What types of behaviors are thought to be under the domain of morality? One researcher by the name of Richard Schroeder was especially influential for Haidt, and he identified what he calls three spheres of ethics in cultures around the world. What he called the ethic of autonomy. These are rules and practices to protect individual choice. So, you know, the idea that there are rules and practices that allow people to pursue their own interests, to pursue their lifestyle, what they value in life. And that's something that cultures around the world value. The second sphere would be the ethic of community. These are rules and practices to protect social roles. Sort of the idea is that it's valuable to sort of know your place in society and to respect authority and show deference to certain groups or members in your community and so on. And these are rules and practices that cultures around the world also value. And then the third sphere, the ethic of divinity, rules and practices to protect the body and the soul, right? Again, then, the idea is that these are three domains where cultures around the world have moralized behaviors that fall into these categories. The behaviors that are related to autonomy, community, divinity are likely to be seen as falling under the category of moral. That if you violate these norms of behaviors, then you're subject to punishment or some kind of sanction. And you will be cheered if you uphold and defend these behaviors. Now, from this anthropology research, Jonathan Haidt then is going to distill out 5 moral foundations. What he argues, these are 5 areas of concern that cultures around the world are likely to treat as moral concerns. Now, how do you get the 5 out of the 3? Well, we'll see that the ethic of autonomy is captured in Haidt's first couple of foundations. First, harm and care foundation, and the fairness reciprocity. So these 2 foundations are related to Schroeder's ethic of autonomy. The third and the fourth, in-group loyalty, authority, and respect. These 2 foundations are related to Schroeder's ethic of community, protecting social roles. Right, in any kind of society, there are hierarchies, and there are status differences, and there are certain rules and practices that sort of help you navigate the social world. And these 2 foundations, in-group loyalty, defending your own group, being loyal to your group, and authority, respecting the status hierarchies in your society, and so on. These things are related to that ethic of community. And finally, the ethic of divinity, that would be the purity and sanctity foundation for Jonathan Haidt. Now, he came up with these 5 moral foundations, not just from the anthropology literature, but also from the literature in evolutionary biology. So he's going to argue that these 5 foundations have an evolutionary history. They have an evolutionary logic, rationale, and that our ancestors likely had to be concerned about these domains, and consequently we might have sort of brains that are sort of wired to care about these domains today. Now, he's later going to show us that from his research that while we might be sort of wired to be concerned about these 5 domains, people in different cultures around the world may have some of these domains more amplified, or they might be concerned about some of these domains more than others. And we'll take a look at that research in a moment.